All right. So thank you all for coming to our community forum this evening so we can talk about House Bill 4006. This came from the state legislature. This is our third community forum that we've had to address the issue of rent burden households. And so Newberg is one of those communities that is identified that we have more than 25% of our renters who are paying 50% or more of their income towards their household expenses, and that's their rent and their utilities. So we did two of these before. Every year we have a requirement to hold this particular meeting, and we have to do it by the end of December. So I apologize this year, we're a little bit late. We usually do this the first part of December, but given the situation with COVID, we had to make some adjustments on scheduling. So Sue, next slide. All right, so HB 4006. So I'm gonna spend about 15-20 minutes kind of going through some background material for all of you, and then we're gonna open it up and have a conversation on basically three topic areas, and I will get to those. So this particular legislation was to raise the awareness about the severe rent burden communities that we have across the state of Oregon. And Oregon Housing and Community Services and the Department of Land Conservation are kind of jointly managing this particular program. And so they're trying to collect data and get a better understanding. OHCS has a program and a plan in place to address the issues, kind of housing issues in a broader context across the entire state. Next slide, please. So Newberg is one of those communities that is larger than 10,000. And as I mentioned earlier, we have more than 25% of our renters who are paying 50% of their monthly income towards their rent. And so by the legislation, we have to do a survey every year. We have to have a community meeting so we can talk about the rent burden issues and some causes and effects and solutions to all of that. And then at the end in February of each year, I have to submit a report to DLCD and Oregon Housing and Community Services about what we did for permitting of units, residential units, over the prior calendar year. Next slide. So keep this in mind. This slide will come up again at the end of the presentation. So we're going to talk about the causes and consequences of severe rent burden, barriers to reducing rent burden, and possible solutions. And actually online, if you go to the city's website, go to community development and go to planning, there is actually a web page and you can see the 2 prior years and the information we've collected and a copy of the minutes. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background information is that for the current year, based on data we received from the state, that 28.4% of our households are severely rent burdened. Our population has gone up. We're a little over 24,000. The number of severely rent burdened individuals is 822 in the community. And our total households that are under that rent burden are 2,899. Next slide. Actually, the numbers look better than they did last year. So we've gone down. So we're at 28.4% this year. Last year, we were at 28.6%, but our population was smaller, a couple hundred people less. Our severely rent burden has actually gone down a little bit. And our total renter households have actually gone down a little bit as well from the prior year. Next slide. And if we go back to the first year that we did this, we were at 28% severely rent burden. Population was a little under 23,000. Severely rent burdened households were 790, and our total rental households were 2,853. So we're kind of toggling right around that 28% or a little bit above, but our population continues to grow. But overall, our total renter households has actually decreased over the 3-year period.
the total renter households is that all the rental units there are in Newberg?
Yeah, and this comes out of the American Community Survey estimates. And so it's not an actual survey of every household, it's a sampling, and then it's a mathematical extrapolation about what we have. Next slide, please. So, as I've done in prior years, I'm going to go through some slides talking about what we have done over the past 4 years or so. So we did annexations, and this means that if we do an urban growth boundary expansion or an annexation of 15 acres or greater net, minus environmental lands, is that 10% of your land area has to be for high density residential. So this allows a disbursement of multifamily housing throughout the community rather than concentrating it in some selected areas or identified areas. We've done accessory dwelling unit regulations. That was another House bill that came out. We did a grant for manufactured homes. So some of our most cost burdened households actually live in manufactured homes in manufactured parks. And we got a $400,000 grant, and we worked with the Housing Authority of Yamhill County on that and worked with homeowners to do repairs. Those repairs were windows, doors, ADA ramps, bathrooms, HVAC systems, and such. We did a housing needs analysis, and that went to council in 2019. And then we did some focus on the downtown area to allow and trying to get more residential housing. And so we made some modifications to add another tool to our toolkit for residential parking and being able to pay a fee in lieu. Next slide, please. And as you put in your chats, you can do that, and I will come back and I will try to answer those questions for you. In 2019, we had House Bill 2001, and so that did some additional modifications to ADU regulations, specifically on parking. We adopted the Riverfront Master Plan, which allowed some additional residential development to occur. We made some changes to our regulations on first floor and our C3, which is our downtown zone. We had some issues there about commercial square footage requirements that were encumbering the ability to do housing in the downtown area. The council on November 16th adopted a construction excise tax, and that will be on new residential development and commercial and industrial. There are some provisions for exclusion if you're doing affordable units at 80% or less with deed restrictions. And for workforce housing, there's actually some reductions in the fee that you have to pay as well. And then that same time we did the construction excise tax, we made some modifications of the timing for single family and duplexes of when you need to pay your SDCs. And we pushed that back from the time of issuance of building permit to the time of doing a scheduling and insulation inspection. So that helps the carrying costs from the developers who are building housing units. Next slide. We have some ongoing items that we're continuing to work on. And so tonight, HB 4006, something we have to do every year, have a community meeting and do the reporting. We have an Affordable Housing Commission. And so we always push out a notice of funding availability. And so we do have some limited funds, but we can help and partner with homeowners and developers to try to create some affordable housing units. We are participating and sit on the board of the Yamhill County Affordable Housing Corporation. Commissioner Kula created a Yamhill County Housing Solutions, and we were meeting on a regular basis every month up until the COVID issues. And those have been on hiatus, so hopefully those will come back in the spring. And then through the Strategic Economic Development Corporation, we've been having discussions on workforce housing. Next slide. What we're looking to do in November, basically fiscal year 2021, things we're working on now. And so this is based on some material that we brought forward to the City Council in the 1st of November, actually on November 2nd, identifying a 5-year work program to address housing issues within Newberg. So now we're working on a vertical housing tax abatement program in the downtown area. We're working on an urban renewal program, which encompasses downtown and the riverfront area. the council approved what's called an infrastructure time-based extension request, which is related to middle housing, which is another legislative issue that came before many cities across the state of Oregon. We're in the process of updating our housing needs analysis with the new buildable lands inventory and population. We have a separate ad hoc committee who's working on middle housing. And so the first piece we need to work on is duplexes and single family zones. And the second part of that is triplexes, quads, cottage clusters, and townhomes. By the time we get to the end of June, we will have adopted new duplex regulations, and we will have code ready on the triplexes, quads, cottage, and townhomes, and those will come back to council in the fall of 2021. And in addition to that, we're working on a public, semi-public land analysis. We're working on an economic opportunities analysis. You may ask, why does that come up? Well, one of the things that it was identified by the committee who's working on that project is to have a healthy economy and to have business growth within the community, we need to have housing. We need to have housing across the entire strata, from the very low income to those that are above 120%. Next slide. Fiscal year 21-22, we've identified some additional work activities, and that's Fair Housing Council is offered to do a code audit for us so that we can come up with clear and objective standards. We're going to be working on small and tiny homes, recreational vehicles, car camping. An issue came up about being able to share utility lines for sewer and water, which could reduce costs. And then one that's been floating around for a number of years is to look at our limitations we have on only having one kitchen in a home. And could we revise that so you can have two? So essentially you could have like the mother-in-law unit within an existing structure that's connected by doorways, but you can have two kitchens in a particular home. Next slide. In fiscal year 22-23, and these fiscal years start on July 1st, we're looking at doing a housing implementation strategy, looking at lot sizes, a maximum, looking at a minimum density standards, looking at affordable multifamily housing property tax abatement program. There's some provisions in state law for that. Another topic that comes up is about housing on religious institution properties and how we might be able to make that work. We've already been having some discussions with faith-based community on that topic. And then something new that came out is HB 2003, which is a housing production strategy. And we think about this fiscal year will be the time when we get to the point where you have 25,000 or more in population, and we will have to comply with those state provisions. Next slide. In 23, 24, and kind of beyond, density bonuses. We do have stream corridors. We can't fully transfer density out of that undevelopable portion. And so we want to look at that. We want to look at our stormwater treatment regulations. We've been monitoring vacation rentals as we've got more of those. That takes housing units off the market. Substantial completion of utilities and final plats. And this is for subdivisions and partitions. There is some state law in place for that now. We want to look at that further. And then a big one that always comes up in all of our community discussions is reducing or waiving building permit planning fees and SDCs. SDCs always come up as one of being expensive. Next slide. When we get out to fiscal year 25, 26 and beyond, I should say, right now we have a list of 42 items that have been identified to work on. And that has come from Housing Newberg group. It's come from comments from City Council and from community members. So there's a lot of other things to look at about general obligation bond, housing ombudsman, kind of these subsidized work living spaces, expediting reviews, street standards, increasing our building height so we can actually go up instead of going out. SDC, deferrals and loans, manufactured home park preservation, Street lighting requirements for partitions is something that's come up. Efficiency dwelling unit. And so we have some provisions. If you are under 600 square feet, you can pay less in your SDCs. If you're over, it's come up, can we raise that to 1,000 square feet? Reducing some of the cost. And then vesting SDC charges. And this is something that came up from the Home Builders Association. Next slide. Every year, I bring up the fact that Newberg is in with the Portland MSA. And so this year, the median household income is $92,100. And so this slide kind of breaks it out if you have a 1, 2, 3, or 4 person household. And by the percentage, if you're 80%, 50%, or 30% of median income. And those that get the most cost burden are those that are in that 50% and 30% range. Next slide. This is a graphic that comes out of our currently in process updated housing needs analysis, where we can see that our renters, 59% of our renters live in multifamily units. 9% are in attached single family and 32% are in detached single family. So disproportionately, our renters are living in multifamily units within Newberg. Next slide. This is some additional information that's coming out of our 2021 HNA update. And so things that socioeconomic components that affect housing, our age of our households, size, the income keeps coming up over and over again, the diversity of our households, different ethnic groups have different household sizes and types. We've also been seeing that our multifamily units are actually getting larger in size. And with that comes additional cost. And then over on the right-hand side is what's out of the Oregon Housing Community Services, their 2018 statewide housing program. It's talking about equity and racial justice, homelessness, permanent and supportive housing, affordable rental units, home ownership, and then of course, as Newberg is, kind of those rural communities where we kind of take all of those above and they all roll into those rural communities, and how do we address those issues? Next slide. What we're seeing is a growing Hispanic and Latino population. And so when we went back and looked at data from 2000 up to the ACS in the 2012-2016, we saw a 2% increase in our Latino Hispanic population. The census will come out with new numbers and we'll have to see where we're at. I'm sure that it will be above that 13%, but that kind of goes back to the previous slide, looking at that DEI issues and households and how different groups within the community choose to have extended family living under one roof. Next slide. Some additional information out of our HNA update. The median gross rent in Newberg is a little over $1,100. Our renters are more likely to be cost burdened. Right now, I've seen numbers that said that 56 to 58% of our households overall are cost burdened. That means they're spending more than 30% of their income towards their housing and their utility cost. But then again, if you break that down in the subset, is that our severely rent burden is at 28.4%. 56% of our renters pay, I can't see all of this stuff, over $1,000 in rent per month. 41% of our renters pay over $1,200 a month. And our cost burden rates really do vary, but it's really, when you look at the data, and the draft of the HNA is actually on our website under our project page, is that it really impacts those that are making less than $35,000 a year as a household income. Next slide. I always like this graphic to give everybody an idea about income and what you can afford. So if you were looking at a household that earns $27,000 a year, which puts you in that 30% MFI, you can afford $690 a month in rent. And as we showed previously, you're paying over $1,000 a month. And so there's a delta gap that's there. If you look at 50%, you can afford $1,150 a month. If you were trying to have home ownership, you could have a range of $138,000 to $161,000 is what you can afford. And somebody please tell me where you can go out and buy a house for $138,000 to $161,000 in Newberg. I have not seen one. I think Shannon would agree with that. At 80%, you can afford rent of $1,840, but now you're in that $258 to $295. Again, is try to find a unit that you could buy if you were looking to be a home ownership situation for that price range. It does not exist in Newberg. Next slide. Some examples of possible barriers. So this is food for thought as we ask you what your ideas and possible solutions are. Wages comes back to economy. What can you afford to make to be able to provide enough income to put a roof over your family's head? Funding for affordable housing units. And so the council did adopt the construction excise tax. So that puts us in a position to potentially partner with developers to get affordable housing units with deed restrictions. Housing vouchers are hard to come by. We just have an overall lack of affordable housing units. Lack of affordable units in high opportunity areas. And so we're seeing more, individuals thinking or desiring that they would like to live closer to downtown so they don't have to rely on a car, because a car has additional expense associated with that. And then family-sized affordable units. And so I mentioned earlier, our apartment sizes are continuing to increase. But right now, latest number from ACS is that our household size is 2.61 individuals per household. Next slide. Some other potential barriers, increasing demand. And so that's that supply and demand component. Infrastructure costs continue to rise. Land costs continue to rise. Construction costs continue to rise. Limited land supply is an issue that Newberg has been facing for a number of years. And with the HNA, we're seeing that as well, as that we have a deficiency in our high density and our medium density residential land supply over the next 20 years. Talked about SDCs earlier. Parking continues to come up in the middle housing ad hoc committee. Keeps coming up of where can you park if you are only, the state law says you can only have one parking space per dwelling unit. That puts additional demand on the street, and that could potentially change some fabric of community perceptions or neighborhood perceptions. Permit fees. Cost of doing business continues to go up. Neighborhood opposition does come up across the state. I've also heard that in Newberg of, I don't want that type of development across the street from me. I want it to be like I have, but we've got to accommodate housing for all individuals within the community. And then just the cost of financing. The institutional financing continues to go up, and it becomes more burdensome, and it became more so after the Great Recession, where lending institutions really tightened things up. And then a big one that we always hear is just about zoning regulations and modifications that we can do. Next slide. So this is when I get to stop talking, and hopefully I only took my 17 minutes or so. And so we basically have three questions we'd like to pose to all of you and have a conversation is, what are the causes and the consequences of having these severely rent burdened households within the community? What are the barriers to reducing the rent burdens? And then what are some possible solutions given Newberg's particular dynamics? So I will stop there.
I have some thoughts on causes, and I'm not great at the solution part, I guess. But causes would definitely be the market. Portland has started actually seeing higher vacancy rates, especially in studios and one bedrooms, because their rents were incredibly well too high for the general population. So they're seeing a higher vacancy in those types of units, and people are moving out to the suburbs, and they're filling in, Beaverton, Sherwood, and then the populations are progressively moving outward to the more affordable areas. And that's created this whole, and it's been happening for years, of course, but I'm seeing another influx again. And we're not having a problem with our rentals and getting them rented. And through COVID, through the season, is kind of slowed down a little bit, but we're still pacing at a decent rate, still filling units at a decent pace. So I think that's one of the causes. And then, just in general, if a property owner can get a certain rent that seems high, and we've had that situation many times where people say, I want this amount of rent and it's higher than what I would have expected or projected, and we'll throw it out there and they get rented. And that's, when that happens, it just kind of floods out into the other rentals in the area, because people will see, oh, that one got rented at that much. I'd love to make more money. And so it's just the market. Yeah.
It does seem like when there's such a shortage that the costs are just going to go up.
Yep.
We have these houses that we've been trying to give away at Friendsview. And we've had different people looking at trying to take them and put them on existing property or buy property. There's just a real shortage of anything to put houses on in the region. And the people that have it and are willing to sell it are asking a lot more than would make it feasible to put them in. Plus, there's just such a shortage that there's problems with all the properties that there are. There's barriers that can't really be worked around. And then we had a group that was looking at trying to put a project in the downtown area. We couldn't work out getting a piece of property. Nobody wanted to sell. Just there's just a lot of problems like that.
So I'll jump in. One of the questions that was asked in the chat is the decrease in rentals a change of single family houses from rentals or owner occupied or VRBO properties? I think it's early, but I think it's a combination. Is that some property owners may have had a rental and they've chosen to sell that and it's gone back onto the market, so it's become owner occupied. But we've also seen an increase in our short-term rentals over the last 4 years or so, as we've had individuals buy properties, they're absentee, and they're using that particular unit as a short-term rental, which takes it off of the long-term market.
With all the things that you're trying, are you seeing some bearing more fruit than others?
It's hard to say, Todd. I mean, we're early. We're 3 years into this. Well, I can say when I got here almost 6 years ago, housing was an issue. We've done a number of things to put in place. But as I mentioned earlier before the meeting started, there is no silver bullet. It's a combination of many things that need to occur in order to address the affordability issue. I think as we continue on and start to track more of the data, coming up with better metrics about what we're able to do. One example is the construction excise tax, where the council made it very clear is about having some metrics on the success of that and actually put a sunset provision in. So by the time we get to year 5, we'll be back in front of council. Look, how successful were we with this particular tool?
Have you, things like the small house initiative, has that already gone forward, and have people started planning projects for something like that? Or
well, we've
the accessory dwellings, you know, I think you passed something that allowed that. Have you been seeing people putting in accessory dwellings?
We have, you know, the regulations we had a couple of years ago was very prohibitive. You had to go through a conditional use process. It was lengthy. You had to go through public hearings. When the state law changed, we saw an increase in number of applications, people converting garages or adding a second floor onto a garage. We've had interiors where modifications where they're taking some interior space and turning it into an accessory dwelling unit. And we've had detached units. So we kind of saw the spike initially, and then it's leveled off. So where that will go in the future, and I think some of you probably heard me say, is that if you have a lot that is pre-2010, and that's when we had a 7,500 square foot minimum lot size in our R1 zone, is that you've got some space to do an attached or detached. After that, when you get down to a 5,000 square foot lot, it makes it more challenging to try to do an accessory dwelling unit. Not impossible, just makes it a little bit more challenging. If you get into our R2, we went from a 5,000 square foot size down to a 3,000. And some of the comments that have come out of our middle housing ad hoc committee is talking about you end up not having any yard whatsoever. And so I've talked with some developers about for ADUs trying to pre-design those. So when they're building the original home, contemplating doing that accessory dwelling unit at the same time. Is there some economies of scale that are associated with that?
I did want to insert a little thing that this is a bit of a projection on my part, but I've been watching stats so much during COVID that I seeing the vacancies that are happening in Portland. The vacancy rates are going up fairly dramatically month to month. And that just shows that, all of that high-end development could not be sustainable, which those of us, any person can kind of see that. But they're still building. And so I kind of expect that they're also seeing long rates of not being able to fill units in these new buildings. And so all of that put together, I think is going to mean that you're going to see drops in asking rents for those new projects, which is going to then drop the rents for the older buildings. And then that it always ripples out from the urban areas to the suburbs. And then, so the ripple kind of does go, Tigard, Beaverton, Sherwood, Newberg, and so I think it'll take, maybe another year, but I think we've already seen a plateau out here as far as how high the rents can go up. We hit that probably last fall, winter. We're still bringing the older properties that had low rents up to the market, as people move out or whatever. But I think the rents are going to actually drop a little bit in the next probably 1 to 2 years. So I think that it's not going to be a huge dramatic burst of a bubble or something, but I think what long-term people who have lived here a long time and saw those rents go up so high, it was unsustainable, I think,
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen, Shannon, is, just the cost of housing on the other side of the hill is that we get family members who come and say, well, I can get a little bit more house, or it's a little more cost effective if I go over the hill and go to Newberg, and I do that trade-off but now I'm going to commute. And so we see that commuting pattern in HNA. It's showing that our commuting pattern is actually going up. More people are getting up every day and driving out of Newberg to go to work someplace else, which causes a disconnect within the community.
We have low-income people, then we have housekeepers and caregivers that are living in St. Paul or, Canby or out further, Hubbard, and then driving in. So we got the low-income people living out and driving in, and then we got the higher income people living here and driving out. That's an assumption I'm making. I don't have proof of it.
Well, about 8,200, this is based on 2017 ACS data. It's about 8,200 people get up every day and drive out of Newberg to go to work someplace else. About 6,200 people drive into Newberg every day for a job. And we have a little less than 2,000 people who actually live here and work in Newberg.
Do you have an idea of their incomes, of the people that are coming and going?
I don't. I would take some additional digging in the census data to try to figure that out. But I can say is that if you live in Newberg and work in Newberg, you make less. Your household income is less than if you live in Newberg and commute out someplace else, or if you live someplace else and commute in.
We have
Can you hear me?
200 employees, and I suppose we could do a study and see where they're living.
Yeah, I've worked with companies and organizations before, have done their own kind of internal looking at, where do their workers live? And then you already have your own income data to get an idea. It's a sample. It's not necessarily always representative, but it is a sampling. Robert, you had a question?
Students that still live at home too.
Robert Moxley, do you have a question?
Can you hear me, Doug?
Yes, I can.
Okay. This Zoom thing's new to me. Sorry.
It's okay.
I'm old school. Anyway, a lot of good points. Yeah, I think last year you said the median income was 77 or 78,000, and this year it's 92.
Yeah, it went from last year was 87,100. Yeah.
So I'm hoping to be a part of that. I'm hoping to be a part of that pretty soon. Anyway, some good points brought up. I still think we have a supply and demand issue. I don't know how we're going to incentivize, affordable housing other than, tax breaks or any type of it needs to be some type of monetary opportunity. But Shannon, she's got her thumb on the whole situation. But I think rents are going to go up just because of supply and demand. I mean, for my rentals, I have a waiting list, and they're $1,850 to $2,000 a month. So the big picture is, how do we fix this? How do we incentivize middle row housing, affordable housing in general? How do we do that?
So good question, Robert. One of the things, and you and Melissa are actually on that particular committee, is with the middle housing. So HB 2001. So we are looking at duplexes and how we can make duplexes more feasible to do within Newberg. Right now, the regulations read if you wanted to do a duplex, and if you were an R1, you'd have to do a 10,000 square foot lot to have a duplex. And so developers would look at that and say, well, why would I do that? I'll just break it into 2 lots and build 2 detached single family homes. And then my pro forma works out. Under the new regulations that are being discussed is that you could build a duplex on a 5,000 square foot lot, same as you would do on a detached single family. Will that potentially bring costs down? I think it depends in part the type of unit you are building. How many, what I will call accoutrements, do you add? And so it's those finishings on the inside or on the exterior all add to cost. Similar situation plays out in our R2 zone, where today is that to do a duplex, you would have to have a 6,000 square foot lot. In the new state regulations, you could do a duplex in R2 on a 3,000 square foot lot. So one of those earlier slides I brought up was, the opposition from neighbors of, do I want a duplex next to me? If there's a vacant lot, it sat there for a number of years, or, do I want to have the same type of house that the rest of the neighborhood is? Last year, we had some conversations about actually having neighborhoods that are of a mix of income and housing styles are actually better for students. Their educational attainment scores actually go up. Any other thoughts on causes?
So I'll just pipe in. Doug, I feel like is this the 3rd meeting we've had? I mean, maybe time's just running faster for me, but this is the 3rd one, right? And I feel like we've really covered a lot of the causes pretty thoroughly in the last couple of years, with the exception maybe of the COVID kind of adding this like scarcity element to it possibly. But the lack of land, thereby like increasing the cost, like it's kind of the same story.
If you go back, Melissa, I would agree. If you go back and look at the comments from our first community forum we had, by the time we got to the second one, we heard a lot of what we heard in the first meeting. And I'm hearing some of the same issues in the 3rd meeting that we were all the way back in the first meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. And, the effects I think they're still going to be relatively the same too. People, like Shannon said, moving from the Portland area towards here, but then people who can't afford it here moving out, like Todd said, to other places. So, or just staying and being extremely rent burdened. But I mean, I do think you guys have done a really good job of prioritizing solutions and getting a big long list together and chipping away at that. And, it doesn't happen overnight. It'll take a while to build up some CET, but, and some of the other regulations and stuff put into place. But I mean, I think you guys are doing great.
So maybe we'll kind of progress on to the next topic categories, and that's just barriers. Does anybody have some additional ideas on barriers that are out there to address the issue of cost burden?
Doug, can I throw in one issue real quick?
Sure,
This
Andy.
is Andy McCann. As you know, I look at things from a macro standpoint, and I see a state that has Charleston, Coos Bay, K Falls that are dying on the vine. They need some business. They need some things to happen to them, and they can absorb a lot of these people that can get very low income paying jobs here. But if business was developed in other communities, they could move there and get a fairly good paying job. Looking at the micro district with Northwest Portland and the Newberg area, Northwest Portland for the last 4 years, we've experienced a time around Thanksgiving where between around November 10th or so through about February 15th to March 1st, we can't give units away. In fact, we have a winter solstice going right now, special for a unit that normally goes for $1,200 at $999, and I don't even have one person coming to see it. That's just the way it is. In Newberg, we have a unique situation where we have a lot of people that both family members are working, whether it be brother and sister or husband and wife, and they still can barely make an income that will provide for them and their families as they are. And so part of this is the jobs that are available in the Newberg area. I don't think you should put it all on the property managers and whatnot. I think you have to put some of this responsibility on the the jobs that are available in the Newberg area and paying a fair and reasonable wage. And other than that, you think I look at my communities that I operate in Newberg, of which I just have a one or two, but it seems to me like they're doing much better than Portland is handling this COVID situation. We're running 7 to 12% non-payment of fees due to COVID in Northwest Portland, whereas in Newberg, we're running, I think, probably about 2%. So I think you have a difference in A, people and quality of people, and B, what they're being paid for the positions they have. And there just aren't any really high paying jobs. Even ADEC jobs pay a fairly low wage. I have a gentleman that's working there. He has to work there, plus his sister has to have a part-time job to make ends meet with 3 children. So there's more to it than just cost of living. And the cost of living in Newberg isn't all that more expensive than Northwest Portland or any of the other spots in Portland. It's not a lot lower, but it's not, I'd say 750 square feet goes for about 500 square feet in Portland generally. Anyway, that's just a viewpoint from the side.
Those are good thoughts, because there's a parallel process that we're working on with our housing needs analysis, and that's our economic opportunities analysis. So some of you may have heard me say is that, you know, we are challenged with finding and having industrial land. So the recent numbers basically play out this. We have about a surplus of 20 acres of commercial land over the next 20 years. But we have a deficiency of about 150 acres of industrial land. That factors in redevelopment of the mill site. So as we work to try to have a industrial land base where we can have companies establish or existing companies expand and grow so that they are paying those living wages, those family wages, to be able to support their households. And so we're trying to approach this on a multi-pronged aspect, knowing that if you just focus just on the residential and exclude the economic side, you may not be successful. But if you deal with both at the same time, we have a greater chance of being successful, so that there is a wage that is being paid, so that individuals and families can afford to live in whatever type of living unit they're looking at, be it a rental unit, an attached unit, or a detached unit. So
the only other thing I'd like to add is that our contractor that built the building for us, he said, this is the first project that we've never had anything stolen from that we've started and finished. And the only thing we had stolen was the American flag. And we had pictures of him on our security camera coming up, taking down the flag and walking away. And when you go up or you increase density, as you've discussed, you end up having more backbiters in the box. And your rates of problems will go up dramatically as you increase density in the areas. And that's a function of what size of police force we have to maintain what we have.
And those are some conversations we actually had a little bit this week about with our housing units, is adjusting that. And this is based on our 2019 housing plan, is that moving from 23% of our housing stock being multifamily is to increasing that to 32%. But then the corollary to that is that you need to have public safety services in place and personnel to address that increased density as people are living closer and closer together.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andy. Any other ideas or thoughts, feedback on barriers?
Doug, E.C. Bell.
Hi, EC.
Yes, sir. Well, as far as barriers, I do think that for housing to be affordable, given the changes to the greater Portland area, we'll have to try and figure out how to communicate to Newberg that although denser housing will change some of the outward features, the richness of Newberg historically has been economic diversity. You did have folks who were educated and worked at George Fox, and you had people who were educated differently and worked in all kinds of trades and crafts, and you had a diversity in the population and a diversity in the community. And with the increase in housing costs, you're losing that diversity of population, and we're becoming more mono-economical as opposed to diverse. And the only way to maintain really the richness of Newberg's history and the diversity of community economically is going to be to provide housing for that diverse group of folks, which is going to make some of Newberg look differently than it's traditionally looked, but it's going to help maintain the feel and the historical breadth of the community. So it's trying to figure out how to communicate to folks that in changing some of the look of Newberg, we're actually going to be able to keep a lot of the feel and a lot of the richness that makes the culture and the community and the sense of what has historically made Newberg a really rich place to live.
Thank you, EC. Anybody else have some thoughts on barriers? Melissa hit it pretty good by saying a lot of the stuff from last year and the year before is still applicable today.
Doug, can you hear me?
Yes, Robert.
So as far as barriers go, right now, Senate Bill 608, I brought it up the last 2 years. You know, the statewide rent control, the moratoriums. I think that's why you see some of these single family homes that were rentals being sold to owner occupied buyers. You know, that's a barrier.
Okay.
I mean, if we incentivized, you know, rental real estate investments, maybe we could probably hopefully put a dent in the supply problem. But I think a lot of people are backing out because they're worried about the ramifications and the consequences with such, you know, Senate Bill 608 and some of the moratoriums. So that's what I'm seeing.
Anybody else have some thoughts on barriers? All right. So then I'll move on to the last of the three is solutions. So I heard a little bit from Melissa on our list of 42 is that the city council and staff have identified a variety of things to do. Unfortunately, we can't do them all at once. We don't have the bandwidth to do that, but at least we have a program. And so the slides, as I laid those out, and those will be up on the website tomorrow, as at least we've started to structure a program of the topics that we want to address as we move forward over the course of the next 5 years. And I should say, remember when we started all of this, we started off with a list of 9. So 3 years ago, the list was 9. 3 years later, it's grown to 42.
So I would, I noticed something interesting this year was with COVID, you know, more people were struggling with being able to pay rent. However, the assistance that is available, we've been connecting tenants having a hard time with, especially YCAP. YCAP has been amazing through this. They've helped so many people out with so many months of rent. You know, they've been giving out like rent assistance in 3-month chunks, and they're fairly quick with their paperwork. And so that's been extremely helpful. And, you know, relying on assistance is not a good long-term plan for a community, but, you know, I don't know if that is an actual solution, but I just have appreciated that this year, and that keeps landlords paid. And then, you know, that goes into the economic ecosystem of the area. So and that's one thing with SB 608 that Robert mentioned. It's very tenant friendly and harsh on the landlords. And so there's a whole ecosystem there. And so if the landlords can get the money that they need for the rent that the tenants are supposed to be paying, it's like this whole system just works better. And when something works better, you know, I don't know if that would help reduce rent burdens, but yeah, assistance is just something that I noted helped a lot this year. So.
Are you having people that can't pay their rents, Shannon?
Are we having people that can't pay? Yeah. You know, it is, you know, after they get the assistance that's available, we end up, I think this month we have a couple more payments coming in that I know of. So we'll probably end up about 2% at the end of the month that still haven't paid their rent in full. We have probably only, I can think of 3 people offhand that have more than 1 month that they owe currently. So it's, you know, we're managing about 325 units in the moment. So it's not horrible. Like Portland, I've seen numbers that are scary. I've seen, you know, 14, 18% during this COVID period. So.
So Sharon, if I may jump in one more time, what do you think of this 20% or 80% that the state of Oregon is going to pay you and then let you absorb the 20%? If you were a tenant, I'd be upset that I'd paid my rent all this time, and yet these yahoos are going to get off for paying, the state's going to pay 80% of their rent, and the landlords have to accept that as final payment. And I have a problem with that personally. Not only from being a tenant, but from being a property manager as well.
Yeah.
Which is what they're going to vote on Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah. I've heard rumblings about that. I mean, it's really harsh. You know, there's a lot of stuff that these are people that don't understand the housing ecosystem, trying to make decisions to be solutions, but I'm a little bit scared, to be honest.
Well, it's nice because basically in Northwest Portland, a lot of these people we have just written off and said they're never going to be able to pay. So it's kind of a bonus. But when I look at the other tenants that have paid, and I think, what are they going to feel when they go, wow, I paid all this, I didn't have to pay any of it, and the state would have come in and paid 80% of my rent, and I wouldn't have had to pay a thing. It's the wrong motivation. It does nothing. And that's the thing that we have to realize, is that we have a great city, we have super people, we have really low problems as far as community policing and things of that nature. How do we protect that and at the same time somehow make it more livable for the bottom third that are really struggling. And I know I have some people that are in community college, and her husband is working for a muffler shop. They just scrape by barely. But they think she's graduating this spring, and then the bubble will open up and the sun will shine. But they've worked hard for 3 years, and people like that, and you just go, wow, they're going to make it. And yet we've got other people that they're in a drudgery. They just keep grinding away, doing what they can, and they get to the end of the month and there's no money left. And they have, 2 or 3 young kids, and how do we help them? And building more housing to bring in people similar to that is just going to compound the problem and other problems, I feel. And there has to be a way to get around it to say that we can boost these people up, get them so they're better educated, so they can get better jobs, train them in the things that they want to learn and grow in. Having the community college there in Newberg, that's a big plus. And I don't know what else we can do, and anyway.
Well,
that's my rant.
Thank you, Andy. We have a couple other community members we haven't heard from this evening. So David or Megan or Mary, any thoughts you might want to share? Not hearing any. Okay. Anybody have some final comments? I know we put out there that we would do this for about an hour, because usually people can handle about an hour of a Zoom meeting and then they get exhausted looking at a screen. So any final comments?
Well, I did just want to riff off of what Andy was saying. I agree. And, it doesn't send a great message to other tenants. I totally agree with that thought. I guess I was thinking as he was talking that government, it can't solve everything. We can try. It does come down to people and their motivations somewhat, and you can't make, it's hard to make employers pay more. It's hard to, get people to do the nice thing when they could do something that makes them more money. These are all the kind of motivational things that people have, and some of them government just can't help sometimes. And we can do our best to give suggestions, and the government can try. But yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Final comments, thoughts, observations?
Thank you for your good work, Doug. Appreciate it. Appreciate including all of us in your problem solving, and really takes a community to make something like this and make things better.
Okay. Thank you, Todd.
Doug, can you hear me?
Yes, Robert.
So anyways, there's a couple things that stand out. This is the 3rd year I think I've been a part of this, in about 2001. And I think the first year, 2 things that you said to me that stood out. And one was that you were Swiss cheese and you could only be sliced so thin. The other was, I don't want Newberg to be the next bedroom community. And both those hit home. I think that you got a lot on the plate. I think you do a good job. I appreciate what you do for us. The bedroom community thing, I absolutely agree with both those things, right? So the Swiss cheese in the bedroom community, we need to look at ways to provide better jobs for this community. You're in a position of power. You have a great responsibility and an opportunity I'm just a voice. I'm a community member. That's it. So if there's anything I can do or you can do, I would incentivize figuring out how we can get better jobs within this community. I think that the affordable housing situation is going to be a problem for a long time. I wish I had the solution, but I don't think any of us here do. But I think that there's possibilities that we can help that, that situation, and one of which is better jobs within our community. So for what it's worth.
Thank you, Robert. And as I mentioned earlier, we're working on that aspect as well. And I think one of our potential game changers for the community is the fact that the mill site, so we had a mill, we had about 220 employees. The mill was shut down. The mill property has sold. The new owner is looking to redevelop that. And so that provides the opportunity to get those industrial employment jobs, which generally pay much higher than you do in your, service sector jobs if you were working at one of the fast food restaurants or something of that particular nature. So we are actively pursuing that. And I think all those involved, their hope is that we will all be successful for the benefit of the community. Anybody else with a final thought? If not, I want to say thank you to all of our participants this evening. A big thank you, taking a little over an hour of your time on a Wednesday evening of all evenings, and sharing your thoughts and your ideas. I will capture all of this information. We will include it in the report that we have to submit to the state in February. So I mentioned earlier in the slide, we've got some data analysis we've got to pull together. We've got to catalog all the conversation this evening, put together those notes, essentially look like minutes, and submit that to the state to meet the requirement. I would assume that we will have this community forum again next year. I don't believe that we're going to drop below 25% severely rent burden over the course of the next year, given the fact that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And it will take a while to dig our way out of that. So thank you all. I appreciate it. And I will see a variety of you around town, or at least on Zoom.
Yeah. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Sue.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to all of you.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.
Thanks.